Hi guys, welcome to our third video on the Rive Dive channel. Today we're going to be breaking down the last video I had made, and today instead of just like literally going over the last video and breaking down the different reasons why I did different things, I just want to use the opportunity to explain how to go about any interactive animation you want to make. It could be for your own personal project, it could be for a client, it could be for maybe you're trying to also teach someone else too. So there's a general approach, there's a process to making interactive animation, and in this video, I'm actually going to be breaking every single thing down. So number one is you have to have a deep understanding of the interactive animation you want to make. Say you want to make a D-pad for like a joystick that is going to be controlling a particular character in the game, or you want to make like the kind of interactive animation that we made in the last video, or any type of interactive animation at all. You need to sit down and really like deeply understand what exactly do you want to make, what is it, and sit down, write down the different parts. Sometimes I take down my notes and jot down everything and be sure that I have a proper understanding of what I actually want to do. Number two, so the second thing you want to do anytime you're working on any interactive animation is you want to then figure out your logic. Say for instance you already decided what you want to work on there's a client project that says, oh, we want this particular thing to do something like this when we click this, or we want something to actually perform like this. Sit down and break everything down to really understand how you can actually make it work. For instance, if you're planning to build a D-pad for a joystick for a character in a game that you're building, you really need to understand how character moves and what makes them move. What's the logic behind when I press this particular button? What exactly does it do? And basically, I'll take a joystick, a D-pad for a joystick, for instance. What actually happens when you press left is that there's something that adds a certain number to the position, to the X position of your character. If you're moving right, it's going to be subtracting that fixed amount from the X position of your character as well. But there's still other things like the animation, because when you subtract from the position, it just instantly jumps to that part, to a new position. So you want it to be that there's a way that it's actually walking to that particular new position. You need to really sit down and really figure out the logic for whatever particular interactive animation you want to make. And one very important tip that I found helpful is that you can actually use AI. AI can help you quickly give you specific logic based on what people have actually done in the past to actually help you move faster in your work. Also, another thing that I would really like to say when it comes to logic is that you shouldn't be too dependent on AI, because AI can hallucinate sometimes, AI can make your work longer. In fact, if you're going to use AI, I would suggest that you already have specific way you want to do your things, and then you're accurately describing your current situation to AI so that it can actually help you fix the next part of your logic, not necessarily like it giving you, you know, its own entire logic, because like AI can be so bogus and can, say a bunch of things. Right. So you have to sit down, figure out logic yourself, and actually really now ask AI where you need help. And so number three is actually that you can actually do a quick sketch. So let's say for instance, when you figure out your logic, you can just do more like a diagram that tells you, oh, so this moving to this, moving to that, right? So you don't actually get yourself confused, right? So you say, oh, like, so because sometimes depending on how complex the interactive animation you're trying to build, things might actually get complex. So you just have to say, you can quickly draw a diagram that shows you, oh, you move from this to that, and then you move from that to this. Number four is actually that you need to build your visuals. So in this stage of building your visuals, you don't actually have to make it really complicated. In fact, just abstract. You can have like the complex things that you want to build, but ensure that it's actually like the little details now, because you are actually not yet sure whether or not your logic is actually going to work. Give or take, you can actually make this like your number 5 step, the step I'm actually about to mention now, you can actually bring it before this step that I actually mentioned. But at this stage, it's very important that you know that you're not yet doing anything complex, because you want to test out your logic first to be sure that it's actually working correctly before you start to build more complex visuals on top of that. All right, so step 5 is for you to test out your logic. So depending on how big the interactive animation you're trying to build, you need to test out your logic, and you need to do it in, you need to strip it down to the basics to ensure that the basics is actually working before you build on top of that. So let's say for instance you're actually working on a game, and a big part of game dev is collisions. So let's say for instance you're already getting your collisions right, you're already working on your collision logic, etc. In order, instead of you like building everything and building the entire collision for your entire maybe game, and then figure out that, oh, it's actually not working, so it's best for you to build collision for logic for just a small thing, maybe a small block, and to see if your collision is actually working for that small block before you can actually now test, replicate that same logic for every other thing. So it's very important that you test your logic before you actually build a more complex thing, and then later now find out that, oh, your logic wasn't actually working in the first place. So it's very important that you test your logic. So of course, when you test your logic, you can then now build simple, you can then try to make it better, build more things on top of it. But everything is actually starting from that solid foundation. Now, number 6, which is actually the final step. The final step is do whatever you want to add as icing on top of your cake. So your cake being the actual basic logic that you have already set up that is actually already working. You can then build more complex things up on top of that. You can make your visuals more complex, can add more logic to the basic logic that you already set up. And also, one very important thing to note, depending on how complex what you're trying to build, is that ensure you actually save your progress. Let's say for instance you're working on a particular logic, and you've already gotten it correctly and is working accurately. I'll suggest that before building on top of that logic, you actually save the current version and create a new Rive document to actually now build the new logic that you actually want to add on top, such that you can always revert back to the previous state of things if your new logic isn't working. Of course, you can always keep adding more logic as you keep building, and if you fall into any problems, you can just create a new Rive file, test out the basic logic itself, and then repeat step 5 and 6, and then now once you're sure that your logic is actually working, add it to the already fundamental logic that you were trying to do. I hope that didn't sound confusing at all. All right, so build first, test first before actually adding to your main logic. That's it. So that way you can keep adding more logic, adding more logic, adding more logic to maybe build. Let's say you're actually trying to build a game or something that's really complex. So thank you so much for actually listening. And we'll have very interesting fireside chats actually coming. Our one is going to hold by God's grace March 29, and we're actually having the other one coming up by God's grace after Easter. I would like the April 12th thereabout. So thank you so much for taking time out to listen. See you on our next video.